Unlimited wealth buys luxury, but it cannot bribe the laws of physics. Welcome to a strictly educational forensic breakdown of 8 millionaire wedding disasters. We analyze these catastrophic events not for shock, but to demonstrate how ignoring basic science turns fatal. Do not replicate these actions. Understanding the fundamental physics here might actually save your life today. 1. August 12, 2008. The deceased was the groom and the sole heir to a massive metallurgical empire. He possessed a bank account that vastly outstripped his basic survival instincts. He demanded a breathtaking, life-size replica of a Spanish galleon carved entirely from imported glacial ice. This absurdly expensive object was the centerpiece for his outdoor summer wedding. His elite wedding planners practically begged him to install hidden refrigeration coils inside the icy hull. They knew the afternoon summer heat would be absolutely brutal on the frozen sculpture. However, the groom suffered from unchecked financial arrogance and a very strict aesthetic vision. He vetoed the vital cooling system entirely because he absolutely hated the mechanical noise. He claimed the faint hum of generators would ruin the acoustic vibe of his exclusive party. He genuinely believed his immense wealth could bribe ambient temperatures into ignoring frozen water. This is exactly where the absolute reality of thermodynamics entered the VIP section uninvited. Ice is a fragile material highly susceptible to rapid thermal energy transfer. It constantly absorbs ambient heat from the air and punishing solar radiation from the sun. When a giant asymmetrical block of ice melts, it absolutely does not do so evenly. The sun-facing starboard side of the ship absorbed millions of photons and melted rapidly. The shaded port side stayed relatively intact and retained a massive amount of weight. This aggressively uneven melting silently and inexorably shifted the colossal frozen sculpture's center of mass. In physics, the center of mass is the exact balance point of an object's total weight. If that invisible point of equilibrium moves outside its physical base of support, gravity demands a correction. Gravity does not negotiate, and it certainly does not care about your massive net worth. The groom was totally oblivious to the microscopic structural fractures echoing through the ice behind him. He confidently positioned himself directly beneath the towering, overhanging frozen bow of the ship. He stood there proudly to deliver a painfully long, incredibly self-congratulatory speech to his guests. For 45 uninterrupted minutes, he droned on about his brilliant business strategies and visionary leadership. Meanwhile, the aggressive 80-degree summer heat constantly chewed through the intricately sculpted icy rigging. Heavy drops of chilled meltwater began to rain down upon the wealthy crowd like a localized storm. It was a glaring warning sign of impending doom that anyone with common sense would notice. The groom smugly ignored it, assuming his guests were just impressed by the atmospheric condensation. The rapid structural degradation finally hit a critical threshold just as he paused for applause. Deep within the core of the frozen hull, a massive fault line silently snapped under the pressure. The drastically shifted center of mass finally breached the safe footprint of the reinforced wooden platform. The majestic frozen bowsprit emitted a deep, terrifying groan that silenced the entire crowd. The hydrogen bonds holding the frozen water molecules together failed in a sudden cascading chain reaction. As the groom smiled broadly for the flashing cameras, a massive chunk of ice completely detached. A 4-ton block of heavily compressed ice plummeted downward toward the clueless billionaire. It accelerated rapidly under the inescapable, invisible pull of the Earth's gravity. The resulting impact delivered a sudden, overwhelming kinetic transfer directly to his physical form. This brutal force completely bypassed every single biological defense mechanism the fragile human body possesses. The groom suffered instantaneous, non-survivable displacement from his original standing position. He experienced a fatal structural failure of the cranium and the upper cervical spine. It was an immediate cessation of all biological functions upon blunt force collision with the lawn. The official engineering investigation firmly concluded that his arrogant rejection of basic thermal mitigation caused the collapse. It is incredibly ironic that a powerful heir whose family built a global empire on steel died this way. He was fatally overcome by a fragile material yielding to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. 2. October 31st, 2010. A prominent venture capitalist discovered that aggressive business tactics are completely useless against expanding gases. This incredibly wealthy VIP guest attended a highly exclusive millionaire wedding after-party. The venue was a decommissioned underground bank vault that had been rented out for the night. The organizers planned a theatrical tasting of molecular cocktails heavily infused with liquid nitrogen. The vault featured thick steel walls, heavy concrete floors, and incredibly loud, echoing acoustics. To ensure a moody, quiet atmosphere, the event coordinator completely deactivated the industrial ventilation system. They knowingly prioritized a trendy auditory aesthetic over the basic human biological need for breathable oxygen. This phenomenally stupid logistical decision set the perfect stage for a brutal lesson in chemical properties. Liquid nitrogen is an incredibly useful substance when handled by educated professionals in well-ventilated labs. It naturally rests at a profoundly freezing temperature of minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. When this extremely cold fluid hits standard room temperature, it does not just gently melt. It rapidly and violently boils into a thick, dense, rapidly expanding gas. During this dramatic phase change, nitrogen expands to nearly 700 times its original liquid volume. Imagine violently stuffing 700 inflated balloons into a tiny phone booth all at once. Because nitrogen gas is completely colorless and entirely odorless, it provides absolutely zero sensory warning. If released in a sealed, unventilated room, this expanding gas acts like an invisible bulldozer. It efficiently and silently pushes all the lighter, breathable oxygen right out of the enclosed space. This creates a highly localized zone of pure nitrogen, leading directly to severe environmental hypoxia. The impatient venture capitalist was absolutely desperate to be the very first person to drink. He aggressively shoved his way to the front of the crowded mahogany bar. He treated getting a glowing novelty drink like a hostile corporate takeover that required his total dominance. The nervous bartender poured massive, irresponsible quantities of liquid nitrogen into an oversized mixing bowl. A thick, spectacular curtain of dense white fog cascaded over the bar and onto the expensive shoes of the guests. The venture capitalist leaned heavily over the bowl, breathing in deeply through his nose. He wanted to fully experience the theatrical fog before anyone else had the chance. He was entirely unaware that he was inhaling a concentrated column of pure, oxygen-displacing nitrogen gas. With each enthusiastic breath, he actively purged the life-sustaining oxygen directly from his own circulating bloodstream. Your brain is actually terribly designed for detecting a sudden lack of oxygen in the environment. Humans only feel the terrifying, burning panic of suffocation when carbon dioxide builds up in the blood. Because he was still successfully exhaling carbon dioxide, his body never triggered an emergency alarm. His brain simply ran out of crucial metabolic fuel without sending a single conscious warning signal. The wealthy investor just exhibited a brief, vacant stare as profound neurological depression took hold. Acute cerebral hypoxia caused a total loss of consciousness in a matter of mere seconds. His body lost all voluntary muscle control instantly as his brain rapidly shut down. He suffered a sudden kinetic collapse directly onto the solid, unyielding concrete floor of the vault. The brutal physical impact, combined with catastrophic oxygen deprivation to his heart muscle, induced instantaneous cardiac arrest. He endured a fatal cessation of all vital metabolic processes without ever realizing he was actually dying. The subsequent hazardous materials investigation revealed the vault's oxygen levels had plummeted to practically zero. The wealthy organizers had accidentally built a perfectly efficient, incredibly expensive subterranean oxygen depletion zone. They did this entirely by accident just to make their signature drinks look a little more magical for photos. 3. August 11, 2014. The highly aggressive head wedding coordinator possessed a micromanagement style so intensely overbearing that she demanded a literal omniscient view of the entire millionaire reception. To achieve this unprecedented level of absolute control, she rented a massive commercial hot air balloon. She ordered the ground crew to tether the colossal aircraft exactly 10 meters above the sprawling estate lawns. From this elevated, majestic vantage point, she could bark aggressive orders through a megaphone at the frightened catering staff down below. She firmly believed that her exorbitant hourly rate somehow insulated her from the highly unpredictable realities of atmospheric physics and structural engineering. The massive balloon was anchored to the Earth by a single, heavily braided nylon tether attached to a ground winch. During the chaotic setup phase earlier that morning, this specific nylon rope was carelessly dragged across a jagged concrete driveway. This brief moment of severe friction created thousands of invisible microabrasions deep within the synthetic polymer fibers. Nylon is an incredibly strong material under perfectly pristine conditions, boasting a massive capacity for bearing heavy mechanical loads. However, its overall structural integrity is entirely compromised when the outer woven sheath suffers even minor abrasive damage. The arrogant coordinator, entirely focused on the placement of the floral arrangements, completely bypassed the mandatory visual inspection of her only safety line. She climbed confidently into the wicker basket, completely oblivious to the compromised synthetic fibers holding her life in the balance. This is exactly where the uncompromising reality of tensile strength and thermal dynamics decisively entered the wedding schedule. As the intense mid-afternoon sun relentlessly baked the massive expanse of dark asphalt in the nearby guest parking lot, it created a powerful, invisible thermal updraft. This massive column of rapidly rising, superheated air surged aggressively upward, colliding directly with the canopy of the hot air balloon. The immense aircraft acted just like a giant parachute, instantly catching the powerful thermal current and violently surging toward the sky. This sudden, massive vertical lift generated thousands of pounds of immediate, unmanageable kinetic stress entirely concentrated on that single, damaged nylon rope. In structural physics, every single material in the universe possesses an absolute, mathematically defined maximum limit of tensile strength. Once a physical load firmly exceeds that critical threshold, catastrophic material failure is completely instantaneous and mathematically guaranteed. The compromised synthetic fibers within the tether aggressively stretched, desperately trying to store the massive accumulation of mechanical tension. For a brief, terrifying second, the heavy rope functioned exactly like an incredibly massive, heavily strained elastic rubber band. Then, with a deafening, sharp acoustic crack that echoed across the entire estate, the weakened nylon completely exceeded its mechanical limit. The heavy rope snapped violently, resulting in an immediate, catastrophic release of thousands of pounds of stored elastic potential energy. This massive, sudden unloading of kinetic force aggressively shot up the remaining length of the rope directly into the wicker basket. The passenger compartment was violently and instantaneously jerked upward and sideways with absolutely terrifying, unstoppable acceleration. The sudden transfer of momentum effectively transformed the heavy wicker basket into a giant, high-altitude medieval catapult. The arrogant wedding coordinator, who had foolishly refused to wear a standardized safety harness, was forcefully ejected right over the low side of the basket. She was violently launched into the open air, experiencing an immediate, completely non-survivable gravitational descent toward the manicured lawn below. She suffered a catastrophic, absolute, blunt force deceleration trauma upon impacting the Earth. The brutal physical collision caused an instantaneous cessation of all vital systemic functions, ending her micromanagement career permanently. The subsequent aviation investigation concluded that relying on a single, uninspected point of failure is a fundamentally disastrous structural decision. The heavy megaphone was later found completely undamaged, resting quietly in the soft dirt just a few feet away. It served as a highly educational silent reminder that gravity absolutely does not care how much you charge per hour. Or October 24th, 2009. The father of the groom was a vastly wealthy pharmaceutical executive who operated under the dangerous delusion that he was physically invincible. He was heavily accustomed to controlling every single variable in his life, firmly believing his vast fortune insulated him from ordinary human vulnerabilities. He even viewed his own recently implanted cardiac pacemaker as a minor inconvenience rather than a fragile, life-sustaining medical necessity. The opulent wedding reception featured a mesmerizing, incredibly expensive technological illusion designed specifically to display the diamond wedding bands. The rings were resting on a velvet pillow that was inexplicably floating completely unsupported in midair above a sleek black display pedestal. This captivating magical effect was actually achieved using a highly sophisticated array of massive, industrial-grade neodymium magnets hidden seamlessly beneath the table. These rare earth magnets were aligned in perfect opposition, generating an incredibly powerful, entirely invisible electromagnetic field capable of suspending heavy objects. The arrogant pharmaceutical executive, desperate to figure out how the expensive trick worked, aggressively pushed his way past the protective velvet rope. He completely ignored the very clear, highly specific warning signs explicitly advising anyone with medical implants to maintain a safe distance. He smugly leaned his upper body entirely over the pedestal, placing his chest mere inches away from the concealed magnetic array. He simply could not fathom that an invisible, silent force of nature could possibly pose a legitimate threat to a man of his financial stature. This is exactly where the absolute reality of electromagnetic interference decisively canceled his corporate leadership. A modern cardiac pacemaker is a brilliant, highly sensitive piece of electronic medical engineering designed to regulate the electrical impulses of a failing heart. However, for diagnostic and emergency reprogramming purposes, these devices are manufactured with a tiny, internal, magnetic safety switch. When this incredibly sensitive microscopic switch is exposed to a sufficiently strong external magnetic field, it forces the pacemaker into a passive diagnostic mode. This emergency override protocol effectively stops the device from delivering its crucial, life-saving rhythmic electrical pulses to the human heart muscle. The incredibly powerful, concentrated invisible magnetic field emanating from the industrial neodymium array easily penetrated the executive's expensive tailored suit. The magnetic waves passed effortlessly right through his biological tissue and directly intersected with the sensitive electronics buried inside his chest. The microscopic metal switch inside his pacemaker instantly registered the overwhelming magnetic field and loudly clicked into the off position. His heart, completely stripped of its artificial electronic rhythm and heavily weakened by years of stressful corporate takeovers, immediately lost its coordination. There was absolutely no dramatic explosion, no loud mechanical failure, and no visible sparks of any kind. It was a perfectly silent, highly efficient, and absolutely catastrophic electronic malfunction. He experienced a sudden, irreversible onset of ventricular fibrillation, rapidly deteriorating into complete cardiac arrest. His brain was entirely deprived of freshly oxygenated blood within a matter of seconds, causing an immediate and total loss of consciousness. His body simply shut down, and he collapsed heavily right over the top of the mesmerizing, incredibly expensive jewelry display. He suffered a fatal cessation of all vital systemic metabolic processes directly atop the floating diamonds. The subsequent medical examiner's report confirmed that his stubborn refusal to respect invisible electromagnetic boundaries directly resulted in his completely preventable demise. The heavy velvet pillow and the sparkling diamond wedding rings continued to quietly levitate in perfect serene balance directly above his lifeless form. They remained suspended in midair, operating flawlessly under the precise laws of physics that he had so arrogantly chosen to ignore. It is a grim, highly educational testament to the fact that you absolutely cannot negotiate with a permanent magnetic field. 5. July 14, 2008. An authentic, heavily weathered 18th century bronze naval cannon sat beautifully positioned on the manicured lawn as a theatrical prop. It was a highly dangerous historical artifact purchased by an immensely wealthy groom who understood absolutely nothing about metallurgy. Although he was the sole heir to a global munitions company, he possessed a fundamental ignorance of basic explosive chemistry. To dramatically announce the grand presentation of the expensive wedding cake, he decided to fire a loud, celebratory blank charge. Instead of hiring a professional pyrotechnics team to handle the heavy artillery, he wanted to personally pull the firing lanyard, firmly believing that his family's modern military pedigree automatically granted him historical artillery expertise. He made a fundamentally disastrous, absolutely catastrophic logistical decision when selecting the chemical propellant for the massive bronze weapon. Instead of utilizing traditional, slow-burning black powder designed specifically for historical cannons, he packed the barrel with modern, highly refined, smokeless gunpowder. He casually assumed that because modern powder was technologically superior, it would simply produce a much louder, far more impressive celebratory noise. This is exactly where the absolute, completely inflexible laws of chemical burn rates and internal overpressure decisively canceled the cake-cutting ceremony. Traditional black powder is a relatively inefficient chemical mixture that burns at a comparatively slow, highly manageable rate. When ignited inside a cannon, it gradually builds up a steady, pushing pressure that safely launches a heavy projectile out of the barrel. Modern smokeless powder, however, is a highly advanced, incredibly volatile chemical compound strictly designed for modern, high-strength steel firearms. It does not merely burn, it violently and instantaneously detonates, generating a massive, immediate spike in extreme internal pressure. Furthermore, the arrogant groom completely failed to consider the complex, deeply compromised internal structural integrity of the ancient bronze weapon. Over 200 years of historical use and environmental exposure had caused a severe invisible phenomenon known as advanced metal fatigue. The heavy bronze structure was secretly riddled with thousands of microscopic stress fractures and deep, invisible crystalline weaknesses. The groom smugly stepped up to the back of the cannon, completely ignoring the horrified screams of a history professor in the audience. He aggressively yanked the heavy-firing lanyard, instantly igniting the massive charge of tightly packed modern smokeless powder. The highly volatile chemical compound immediately converted from a solid state into a massive, rapidly expanding volume of superheated gas. This instantaneous chemical reaction generated a sudden, absolutely overwhelming spike of internal kinetic pressure that vastly exceeded the weapon's limits. The ancient, severely fatigued bronze barrel was completely incapable of containing the massive, modern explosive force aggressively expanding within its chamber. The compromised metal did not just crack, it violently and instantly shattered into hundreds of heavy, high-velocity metallic fragments. The massive cannon effectively transformed from a decorative historical artifact into an incredibly dangerous, highly unpredictable pressure vessel. The heavy bridge of the weapon completely failed, aggressively directing a massive shockwave of kinetic energy and torn metal straight backward. A massive, jagged chunk of heavy bronze was violently propelled outward, riding the leading edge of the sudden, massive acoustic and pressure wave. The heavy projectile delivered a sudden, completely overwhelming kinetic transfer directly to the upper portion of the groom's biological structure. The incredible physical force bypassed all human skeletal defenses, causing a catastrophic structural failure of the entire cervical column. This massive blunt force trauma resulted in a catastrophic, completely non-survivable disruption of the victim's upper cervical spine and central nervous system. He suffered a complete, immediate cessation of all vital biological functions long before the echoing sound of the explosion even reached the guests. The subsequent forensic ballistics investigation concluded that an arrogant misunderstanding of chemical burn rates directly caused the devastating overpressure event. The heavy, ornate silver cake-cutting knife was later found resting perfectly pristine on a nearby table, completely untouched by the chaos. It serves as a grim, highly educational reminder that modern explosive chemistry absolutely refuses to respect ancient, fatigued bronze. Architecture. 6. August 2nd, 2007. A commercial-grade laboratory ultracentrifuge is a precision-engineered machine that demands absolute, unwavering mathematical respect. Unfortunately, it was placed in the hands of an incredibly arrogant executive chef preparing an excessively lavish feast for a billionaire's outdoor wedding. He treated this dangerous scientific equipment like an ordinary, indestructible kitchen appliance. His signature dish required an absolutely perfectly clear, intensely flavored truffle broth, an aesthetic standard that completely bordered on culinary madness. To achieve this impossible level of liquid clarity, he utilized a highly specialized, commercial-grade laboratory ultracentrifuge. This was not a standard food processor. It was a heavy, precision-engineered machine designed specifically for separating microscopic cellular structures at extreme velocities. During the frantic, high-pressure rush of the elite dinner service, the chef made a fundamentally disastrous, catastrophic mathematical error. He rapidly loaded the heavy titanium test tubes into the machine's internal spinning rotor, casually estimating the volume of the liquid by sight alone. He completely bypassed the mandatory, strictly enforced protocol of using a highly calibrated digital scale to perfectly equalize the mass of every tube. In his arrogant haste, he created a microscopic weight discrepancy of exactly 15 grams between the opposing sides of the heavy internal payload. 15 grams is roughly the equivalent weight of 3 standard packets of sugar, a completely insignificant amount of mass in a normal environment. However, the unforgiving laws of rotational physics dictate that kinetic energy and centrifugal force multiply exponentially as rotational speed drastically increases. The chef slammed the heavy lid shut and recklessly cranked the digital dial all the way up to a staggering 20,000 revolutions per minute. As the electric motor spooled up, that tiny 15-gram error began to generate a massive, highly asymmetric outward physical force. At 20,000 rotations every single minute, those 3 little packets of sugar effectively transformed into hundreds of pounds of aggressive kinetic stress. The incredibly heavy machine instantly began emitting a terrifying, high-pitched mechanical whine, vibrating violently under the extreme internal pressure. The severe imbalance created a massive resonance, causing the entire 70-pound centrifuge to literally begin walking across the stainless steel preparation counter. Instead of immediately cutting the power and stepping back, the profoundly arrogant chef physically stepped directly in front of the raging machine. He firmly placed both of his hands directly on top of the vibrating casing, foolishly attempting to use his own body weight to hold it down. He completely failed to understand that he was trying to manually wrestle with thousands of pounds of invisible, asymmetrical kinetic energy. The massive rotational force rapidly surpassed the absolute maximum structural tolerance of the machine's solid steel central drive shaft. The thick internal spindle violently snapped under the extreme, uneven pressure with a deafening metallic crack. The heavy titanium rotor instantly detached from its mounting, violently converting its massive rotational energy directly into forward linear momentum. The incredibly dense metal component effortlessly breached the centrifuge's protective safety casing, ejecting outward at the horrifying speed of a high-velocity mechanical mass. The flying titanium mass delivered an overwhelming, sudden kinetic transfer directly to the center of the chef's upper chest. He suffered massive, completely non-survivable blunt force trauma to the chest cavity, resulting in instantaneous structural failure of the rib cage. The violent physical impact caused an immediate and total cessation of cardiovascular function, ending his life before he even hit the floor. The subsequent engineering investigation ruled that his arrogant dismissal of precise mathematical balancing directly caused the catastrophic mechanical failure. A single, perfectly clarified, visually stunning drop of expensive truffle broth was later found resting quietly on the dented steel counter. It served as a silent, exceptionally expensive reminder that rotational kinetic energy absolutely refuses to compromise with a rushed culinary schedule. 7. July 14, 2008, an authentic, heavily weathered 18th century bronze naval cannon sat beautifully positioned on the manicured lawn as a theatrical prop. It was a highly dangerous historical artifact purchased by an immensely wealthy groom who understood absolutely nothing about metallurgy. Although he was the sole heir to a global munitions company, he possessed a fundamental ignorance of basic explosive chemistry. To dramatically announce the grand presentation of the expensive wedding cake, he decided to fire a loud, celebratory blank charge. Instead of hiring a professional pyrotechnics team to handle the heavy artillery, he wanted to personally pull the firing lanyard, firmly believing that his family's modern military pedigree automatically granted him historical artillery expertise. He made a fundamentally disastrous, absolutely catastrophic logistical decision when selecting the chemical propellant for the massive bronze weapon. Instead of utilizing traditional, slow-burning black powder designed specifically for historical cannons, he packed the barrel with modern, highly refined smokeless gunpowder. He casually assumed that because modern powder was technologically superior, it would simply produce a much louder, far more impressive celebratory noise. This is exactly where the absolute, completely inflexible laws of chemical burn rates and internal overpressure decisively canceled the cake-cutting ceremony. Traditional black powder is a relatively inefficient chemical mixture that burns at a comparatively slow, highly manageable rate. When ignited inside a cannon, it gradually builds up a steady, pushing pressure that safely launches a heavy projectile out of the barrel. Modern smokeless powder, however, is a highly advanced, incredibly volatile chemical compound strictly designed for modern, high-strength steel firearms. It does not merely burn, it violently and instantaneously detonates, generating a massive, immediate spike in extreme internal pressure. Furthermore, the arrogant groom completely failed to consider the complex, deeply compromised internal structural integrity of the ancient bronze weapon. Over 200 years of historical use and environmental exposure had caused a severe invisible phenomenon known as advanced metal fatigue. The heavy bronze structure was secretly riddled with thousands of microscopic stress fractures and deep, invisible crystalline weaknesses. The groom smugly stepped up to the back of the cannon, completely ignoring the horrified screams of a history professor in the audience. He aggressively yanked the heavy firing lanyard, instantly igniting the massive charge of tightly packed modern smokeless powder. The highly volatile chemical compound immediately converted from a solid state into a massive, rapidly expanding volume of superheated gas. This instantaneous chemical reaction generated a sudden, absolutely overwhelming spike of internal kinetic pressure that vastly exceeded the weapon's limits. The ancient, severely fatigued bronze barrel was completely incapable of containing the massive, modern explosive force aggressively expanding within its chamber. The compromised metal did not just crack, it violently and instantly shattered into hundreds of heavy, high-velocity metallic fragments. The massive cannon effectively transformed from a decorative historical artifact into an incredibly dangerous, highly unpredictable pressure vessel. The heavy breech of the weapon completely failed, aggressively directing a massive shockwave of kinetic energy and torn metal straight backward. A massive, jagged chunk of heavy bronze was violently propelled outward, riding the leading edge of the sudden, massive acoustic and pressure wave. The heavy projectile delivered a sudden, completely overwhelming kinetic transfer directly to the upper portion of the groom's biological structure. The incredible physical force bypassed all human skeletal defenses, causing a catastrophic structural failure of the entire cervical column. This massive blunt force trauma resulted in a catastrophic, completely non-survivable disruption of the victim's upper cervical spine and central nervous system. He suffered a complete, immediate cessation of all vital biological functions, long before the echoing sound of the explosion even reached the guests. The subsequent forensic ballistics investigation concluded that an arrogant misunderstanding of chemical burn rates directly caused the devastating overpressure event. The heavy, ornate silver cake-cutting knife was later found resting perfectly pristine on a nearby table, completely untouched by the chaos. It serves as a grim, highly educational reminder that modern explosive chemistry absolutely refuses to respect ancient, fatigued bronze. Architecture. 8. July 7, 2015. On the windy cliffs of a sprawling private coastal estate, a massive industrial wind turbine sat entirely out of its natural element. It was rented specifically for a billionaire's photo shoot by a celebrity bridal stylist whose artistic vision completely blinded him to basic mechanics. The bride was wearing an extravagant custom gown featuring a massive 15-meter-long train woven from heavy premium silk. The stylist decided that the natural ocean breeze was entirely insufficient for his dramatic magazine cover vision. He demanded absolute control over the environment and rented a massive, commercial-grade industrial wind turbine designed for generating hurricane-force gales on movie sets. This machine was essentially an incredibly powerful airplane engine surrounded by a protective steel cage, completely unsuited for close proximity photography. The stylist positioned the massive fan just a few yards away, ordering the operator to crank the heavy electric motor to its absolute maximum capacity. He completely ignored the glaringly obvious, bright yellow warning labels plastered all over the machine's heavy steel casing. He positioned himself directly in the danger zone, tightly gripping the heavy tail end of the silk train to manually guide its aerodynamic flow. This is precisely where the unforgiving law of Bernoulli's principle decisively entered the fashion industry. Daniel Bernoulli was a brilliant scientist who discovered a very simple rule. As the speed of moving air increases, its pressure drastically drops. The roaring industrial fan blasted a massive high-velocity column of air directly over the top of the heavy silk fabric. This incredibly fast-moving air created a severe localized zone of low pressure right above the dress. Meanwhile, the slower-moving, normal atmospheric air beneath the fabric aggressively pushed upward, desperately seeking to fill that newly created low-pressure void. This powerful aerodynamic phenomenon is the exact same fundamental physical mechanism that allows massive commercial passenger jets to lift off a runway. The expansive 15-meter silk train instantly transformed from a beautiful decorative accessory into a highly efficient, incredibly powerful aerodynamic sail. The sheer square footage of the heavy fabric caught the aggressive wind current, generating hundreds of pounds of sudden, unmanageable upward lifting force. The massive column of silk whipped wildly through the air and violently lashed into the aggressively spinning metal rotor of the industrial fan. The dense fabric immediately snagged on the exposed, high-speed central drive shaft of the turbine. In a fraction of a second, the heavy spinning axle transformed into a merciless, motorized winch. The thick silk began wrapping tightly around the screaming metal shaft, actively reeling in the fabric with thousands of pounds of unstoppable mechanical torque. The arrogant stylist, completely obsessed with getting the perfect photograph, foolishly refused to let go of the fabric in his hands. The massive winding torque of the industrial fan aggressively yanked the heavy silk, turning the dress into a high-tension tow cable. The stylist was violently and instantly pulled forward with terrifying, unstoppable acceleration. He was forcefully slammed directly into the thick, unyielding steel safety grating that protected the fan's front air intake. The sheer velocity of the collision delivered a sudden, overwhelming kinetic transfer directly to his upper body. He suffered an immediate, catastrophic structural failure of the cervical vertebrae and massive, non-survivable blunt force trauma to the cranium. The violent physical impact caused an instantaneous cessation of all critical neurological functions, terminating his life long before the camera shutter clicked. The official police investigation swiftly concluded that an absolute failure to respect basic aerodynamic physics and industrial safety protocols caused the event. The immense, unstoppable power of a Hollywood wind turbine absolutely does not care about your artistic vision. Respect physics, because it will never respect you. Let these educational case studies be a strict warning. Absolute safety compliance saves lives. Now I want your verdict. Which of these 8 disasters was the absolute most embarrassing way to leave this earth? Drop your smartest judgment in the comments right now. Destroy the like button and subscribe for more relentless forensic logic.